For most of human history, the future moved slowly. Generations lived and died under the same skies, using the same tools, telling the same stories. Change existed, but it unfolded at a pace the human mind could absorb. Today, that rhythm has broken. The future no longer approaches gradually. It accelerates toward us, shaped by forces that grow faster than our ability to fully understand them. Technology advances at a speed unmatched by wisdom. Decisions made in a single decade now echo across centuries. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, climate instability, and global interconnectedness are no longer distant possibilities. They are present conditions. Humanity finds itself shaping systems powerful enough to redefine what it means to be human, without clear agreement on where those systems should lead. This moment is not dramatic because something has gone wrong. It is dramatic because something unprecedented is happening. For the first time, a species is actively redesigning the environment that shaped it, while simultaneously redesigning itself. The tools we create are no longer neutral. They influence how we think, how we relate, how we decide, and how the future unfolds. The question is no longer what will happen next. The question is deeper. What kind of future is even possible for a species that can no longer slow itself down? Can humanity remain coherent as its technologies fragment experience and accelerate change? Can meaning survive in a world where the future is constantly rewritten before it arrives? As you listen, consider this carefully. The future is not a destination waiting ahead of us. It is something forming right now, shaped by countless small choices, amplified through systems too complex to control. Humanity is standing at a threshold, not knowing whether what comes next will feel like progress, survival, transformation, or something entirely new. Humanity has reached a moment unlike any other in its history, not because a single invention changed everything, but because many slow developments suddenly converged. For thousands of years, human societies evolved within limits set by biology, geography, and time. Progress was gradual, mistakes were localized, and consequences unfolded slowly enough to be understood and corrected. Today, those limits are dissolving. Technology compresses time, erases distance, and multiplies impact, creating a world where actions ripple outward faster than collective understanding can keep pace. This turning point is defined less by what humanity has achieved and more by what it can no longer avoid influencing. Climate systems, once shaped primarily by natural cycles, now respond measurably to human activity. Digital networks alter cognition, attention, and social structure at a global scale. Artificial systems begin to replicate tasks once thought uniquely human. The future is no longer something humanity merely enters. It is something humanity actively constructs, whether intentionally or not. What makes this moment unstable is not the presence of power, but the imbalance between capability and foresight. Human tools now operate at scales that exceed human intuition. Decisions made in boardrooms, laboratories, or lines of code propagate through ecosystems, economies, and cultures in ways that cannot be fully traced. The feedback loops that once moderated human impact now amplify it. Small choices, repeated across billions of individuals and machines, accumulate into forces that reshape the planet itself. This acceleration exposes a deeper tension within human nature. The human mind evolved to navigate immediate environments, to respond to threats and opportunities within a limited horizon. Yet, the systems humanity now controls unfold across decades, centuries, and planetary scales. There is a growing mismatch between the speed of change and the speed of reflection. Civilization advances faster than its ability to pause, creating a future that arrives before it can be meaningfully questioned. At this turning point, uncertainty is not a temporary phase. It is a structural condition. Humanity cannot return to a slower world without abandoning the systems that now sustain it. At the same time, it cannot fully predict where those systems will lead. The future becomes a moving target, shaped by interaction rather than design, sensitive to countless variables that resist centralized control. Progress no longer follows a clear narrative. It fragments into multiple possible trajectories unfolding simultaneously. Standing at this threshold, humanity faces a choice that is not binary, but directional. Not whether change will occur, but how consciously it will be navigated. The turning point does not demand certainty, it demands awareness. The future will be shaped regardless, but whether it emerges through blind acceleration or deliberate adaptation depends on how deeply humanity understands the forces it has set in motion and how willing it is to engage with a future that no longer waits to be discovered, but insists on being shaped. For most of its existence, humanity lived inside a stable temporal framework. The past informed the present, and the present prepared the future at a pace that allowed continuity. Traditions persisted because they had time to root themselves. Knowledge accumulated slowly, carried across generations rather than overwritten within a single lifetime. This long timeline shaped human psychology, culture, and identity. The future felt distant, abstract, and negotiable, something to be approached gradually rather than confronted all at once. That timeline has now collapsed. The future no longer waits at the edge of the horizon. It intrudes aggressively into the present, reshaping conditions before they can be fully understood. Technologies emerge and scale globally within years, sometimes months, altering how people work, communicate, and perceive reality itself. The gap between cause and consequence shrinks, while the gap between action and understanding widens. Humanity finds itself living in a perpetual state of transition, where stability becomes temporary rather than assumed. This collapse changes how history functions. In slower eras, history acted as a guide, offering lessons that could be applied meaningfully to future decisions. In an accelerated world, historical analogies lose precision. Past solutions no longer map cleanly onto present problems because the underlying conditions shift too quickly. Humanity carries a growing archive of experience, yet struggles to convert that experience into foresight. The future moves faster than memory can organize itself into wisdom. As a result, planning itself is transformed. Long-term strategies give way to adaptive responses. Institutions designed to operate across decades are forced into short cycles of revision. Individuals plan lives in fragments rather than arcs, adjusting expectations repeatedly as conditions change. The sense of a coherent life trajectory weakens, replaced by a series of provisional states. The future is no longer something one prepares for once. It must be renegotiated continuously. This temporal compression also affects how responsibility is perceived. When consequences unfold slowly, accountability is clearer. When effects emerge rapidly and diffusely, responsibility becomes harder to assign. Decisions ripple outward through complex systems, producing outcomes that no single actor intended or fully foresaw. Humanity operates within feedback loops that respond faster than reflection, creating a world where action precedes understanding more often than it follows it. The collapse of the old timeline does not mean that the future has become meaningless. It means that meaning must be constructed differently. Humanity can no longer rely on inherited rhythms to guide adaptation. New forms of pacing, coordination, and collective reflection must emerge if coherence is to be preserved. The future is no longer something humanity gradually grows into. It is something humanity is already inside, shaping and being shaped by simultaneously, without the luxury of distance. What makes the current moment especially fragile is not the scale of human power, but the absence of a shared direction guiding it. Humanity has accumulated immense technological, economic, and informational capacity, yet this capacity is distributed unevenly and applied inconsistently. Different societies, institutions, and individuals pursue conflicting goals using the same accelerating tools. Power multiplies faster than coordination, creating a future shaped less by collective intention and more by overlapping, unaligned trajectories unfolding at once. In earlier eras, limitations imposed coherence. Scarcity, distance, and slow communication forced societies to converge around shared narratives and gradual change. Today, those constraints have weakened. Digital systems allow parallel realities to exist simultaneously, each reinforcing its own logic and values. The future no longer advances as a single story. It fractures into multiple visions, each pulling humanity in different directions while drawing from the same global infrastructure. This fragmentation complicates responsibility. When power is centralized, accountability is clear. When power is distributed across networks, algorithms, markets, and automated systems, cause and effect blur. Decisions made locally propagate globally, often detached from their original intent. No single actor fully controls the outcome, yet the outcome still emerges. Humanity shapes the future collectively, but without a unified sense of authorship over what it creates. The absence of shared direction also intensifies competition. Systems optimized for speed and growth reward those who move first, not those who reflect longest. Ethical hesitation becomes a disadvantage. Caution appears inefficient. As a result, development often proceeds without consensus, guided by incentives rather than values. The future is built incrementally, not through deliberate agreement, but through momentum that favors action over alignment. This dynamic produces a subtle instability. Progress continues, yet confidence in its destination weakens. Innovation accelerates, yet trust erodes. Humanity moves forward together physically, but mentally and culturally drifts apart. The future becomes something that happens to societies rather than something they consciously choose. Power grows, but meaning struggles to keep pace with its expansion. At this stage, the question facing humanity is not whether it can shape the future, but whether it can do so coherently. Power without direction amplifies uncertainty rather than resolving it. Without shared frameworks to guide accelerating systems, the future risks becoming a collage of incompatible outcomes rather than an integrated evolution. Whether humanity can recover a sense of collective orientation within this complexity will determine whether its growing power becomes a stabilizing force or a source of permanent fragmentation. When acceleration combines with power and a lack of shared direction, the future begins to fragment. This fragmentation does not appear suddenly or violently. It unfolds quietly, through divergence rather than collapse. Different regions, communities, and individuals adapt to change at different speeds, guided by different values and incentives. Over time, these differences harden into distinct trajectories, creating futures that coexist physically but rarely intersect meaningfully. Technology intensifies this divergence by allowing parallel systems of reality to form. Digital environments, algorithmic curation, and personalized information streams shape perception in increasingly isolated ways. People inhabit worlds that reinforce their existing beliefs, experiences, and priorities. As these worlds evolve independently, shared understanding erodes. The future stops being a common horizon and becomes a collection of separate, self-reinforcing paths unfolding side by side. Fragmentation also manifests economically and biologically. Access to advanced technologies, healthcare, education, and enhancement tools is uneven, creating layers of human experience that differ not only socially, but physically and cognitively. Some populations move rapidly into technologically augmented futures, while others remain constrained by scarcity and instability. The idea of a single human future becomes harder to sustain as lived realities diverge in capability, opportunity, and expectation. This divergence challenges the notion of collective progress. Progress traditionally implied movement towards shared improvement. In a fragmented future, improvement becomes relative. What counts as advancement for one group may feel like loss or threat to another. Without a unifying framework, progress loses its moral clarity. It becomes a competition among visions rather than a coordinated evolution, driven more by momentum than by shared purpose. The most subtle danger of fragmentation is not conflict, but indifference. As futures separate, empathy weakens. The struggles and aspirations of others feel increasingly distant, irrelevant, or abstract. Humanity risks becoming a species that shares a planet, but not a destiny, moving forward together in space while drifting apart in meaning. The future continues to form, but no longer feels collectively owned. At this point, fragmentation is not yet destiny. It is a trajectory shaped by current choices and the absence of others. Whether humanity allows its future to splinter indefinitely or finds ways to re-establish coherence within diversity remains an open question. The risk lies not in change itself, but in allowing change to proceed without bridges, without dialogue, and without a renewed sense of shared responsibility for the world that is coming into being. Acceleration reshapes not only external systems, but the internal rhythms of human life. Attention fragments as information streams multiply, compressing experience into shorter cycles of relevance. What matters today may vanish tomorrow, replaced by something newer, faster, and louder. This constant turnover alters how meaning is formed, favoring immediacy over continuity. The future is no longer anticipated as a distant horizon. It intrudes into the present as a sequence of urgent updates, each demanding response before understanding has time to settle. As acceleration intensifies, coordination becomes increasingly difficult. Institutions designed for deliberation struggle to keep pace with technologies that evolve in real time. Laws lag behind innovation, ethics follow deployment, and governance reacts after systems have already scaled. The future advances through implementation rather than agreement, shaped by what can be built and deployed quickly rather than what has been carefully evaluated. Momentum substitutes for consensus, and speed becomes a silent arbiter of what survives. This dynamic alters power in subtle ways. Those who control acceleration platforms, infrastructures, and feedback loops shape outcomes without needing explicit authority. Influence shifts from decision-making bodies to systems that set tempo and scale. The future is guided less by stated intentions than by the architectures through which choices are made. Acceleration embeds values into processes, making direction implicit rather than debated, and thereby harder to challenge once established. Human adaptability, long celebrated as a strength, is strained under this pace. Adaptation once meant gradual adjustment across generations. Now it demands continuous recalibration within a single lifetime. Skills, identities, and social roles must be revised repeatedly, often without stable ground on which to stand. For many, this produces fatigue rather than empowerment, a sense of perpetual catch-up that erodes the capacity for long-term vision. Acceleration promises possibility while quietly taxing resilience. The future shaped by acceleration also narrows reflection. When change arrives faster than comprehension, evaluation becomes reactive. Success is measured by uptake and engagement rather than by coherence or consequence. Systems optimize for growth because growth is legible at speed, while costs unfold slowly and diffusely. Acceleration favors what can be counted quickly over what must be understood patiently, biasing the future toward metrics that move fast rather than values that endure. If acceleration continues to define the future without counterbalancing forces, the risk is not simply error, but entrenchment. Early designs, assumptions, and incentives harden into infrastructure before alternatives can be meaningfully explored. Path dependence deepens, making later correction costly or impossible. The future becomes less a field of open possibilities and more a channel carved by early momentum, difficult to redirect once established. To engage acceleration responsibly, humanity must learn to distinguish speed from progress. Acceleration can amplify creativity, coordination, and problem-solving, but only when coupled with pauses for integration and review. The defining challenge is not how fast the future arrives, but whether societies can create spaces within acceleration where direction, meaning, and shared judgment are allowed to catch up. Without such spaces, speed itself becomes the author of what comes next. Technology has always been a tool, but it has rarely questioned where it was ultimately heading. In earlier eras, technological progress was anchored to clear human needs: survival, efficiency, communication, comfort. Each advancement served a relatively stable vision of what life should improve toward. Today, that anchor has loosened. Technology evolves not toward a defined destination, but toward its own continuation. Innovation accelerates because it can, not because a shared endpoint has been agreed upon. This shift alters the role technology plays in shaping the future. Instead of serving a collective vision, it begins to generate one indirectly through its effects. Systems are built, scaled, and integrated before their long-term implications are fully understood. Once embedded, they reshape behavior, expectation, and possibility, effectively redefining what feels normal or inevitable. The future becomes less a matter of conscious design and more the cumulative result of technological momentum unfolding without pause. Without a final destination, progress becomes self-referential. Success is measured by adoption, efficiency, and growth rather than by alignment with human values. Technologies compete for attention, data, and dominance, reinforcing cycles that reward scale over reflection. What spreads fastest becomes what defines reality, regardless of whether it enhances coherence, well-being, or meaning. The future is shaped by what survives acceleration, not by what has been carefully chosen. This dynamic introduces a subtle loss of agency. While humans create technology, they increasingly live inside systems that constrain choice and shape behavior automatically. Algorithms curate information, optimize decisions, and guide interaction at speeds no individual can fully track. The direction of development is influenced less by public deliberation and more by technical feasibility and market incentives. Humanity remains involved, but its role shifts from author to participant within frameworks that evolve faster than collective oversight. The absence of a shared destination also fragments ethical responsibility. When technology advances incrementally and diffusely, no single moment demands moral reckoning. Consequences emerge gradually, distributed across time and population. Harm and benefit intermingle, making clear judgment difficult. The future becomes a moving target, always slightly ahead of the questions meant to guide it. Ethics struggles to keep pace with systems that redefine their impact as they expand. If technology continues without a final destination, the risk is not that it will fail, but that it will succeed in directions humanity never consciously intended. Progress may optimize systems while eroding coherence, connection, and shared meaning. The challenge ahead is not to halt technological development, but to reintroduce orientation into its trajectory. Without a sense of where humanity is trying to go, technology will continue to lead the future forward, guided primarily by speed, scale, and its own internal logic rather than by a collectively chosen vision of what the future should become. Artificial intelligence represents a qualitative shift in humanity's relationship with its own creations. Previous technologies extended human strength, speed, or reach, but they remained clearly external. AI differs because it extends decision-making itself. Systems are no longer limited to executing instructions. They learn, adapt, and optimize, often in ways that are opaque even to their creators. Control, once rooted in direct command, becomes indirect and probabilistic, mediated through models that evolve faster than human intuition can follow. This shift complicates the notion of oversight. Traditional control assumes that systems behave predictably within known boundaries. AI systems operate within statistical spaces where outcomes emerge from patterns rather than explicit rules. Small changes in data, context, or objectives can produce large differences in behavior. As these systems scale and integrate into critical domains, the gap between intention and outcome widens. Humanity may guide direction, but it no longer specifies detail, surrendering precision in exchange for capability. The question of control becomes more urgent as AI systems begin to interact with one another. Feedback loops emerge not only between humans and machines, but among machines themselves. Decisions propagate across networks at speeds no human process can match. Intervention becomes reactive rather than proactive, occurring after patterns have already formed. Control shifts from direct governance to boundary setting, an attempt to shape behavior without fully understanding its internal logic. This creates a paradox. The more powerful AI becomes, the more it demands human trust, yet the less transparent its operation becomes. Explainability lags behind performance. Systems succeed by producing results, not by revealing reasoning. As reliance increases, scrutiny weakens, replaced by dependence. Humanity risks normalizing outcomes it can no longer fully justify, accepting effectiveness as a substitute for understanding. Control erodes not through loss of authority, but through quiet delegation. Importantly, this erosion is not driven by malice or intent. It emerges from incentives aligned around efficiency, scalability, and competitive advantage. Systems that perform well are adopted rapidly, often before governance frameworks can adapt. Once embedded, they reshape expectations of speed and accuracy, making slower, more deliberate alternatives appear obsolete. Control is surrendered incrementally, not through a single decision, but through accumulated reliance. The future shaped by artificial intelligence will not be defined by whether humans retain absolute control, because absolute control is no longer a realistic option. It will be defined by how control is reconceptualized. Whether humanity can learn to govern systems it does not fully comprehend, to set meaningful constraints without dictating outcomes, and to remain accountable within environments that amplify complexity faster than reflection. The question is no longer whether AI can be controlled, but whether humanity can adapt its understanding of control to a world where intelligence itself has become distributed, accelerated, and only partially visible. As artificial systems become more capable, humanity increasingly delegates not just tasks, but judgment itself. What begins as assistance slowly becomes reliance. Decisions once made through human deliberation are handed to systems optimized for speed, scale, and consistency. This delegation is often practical and efficient, reducing error and increasing capacity. Yet with each layer of delegation, the distance between human intention and actual outcome grows, subtly reshaping who or what steers the future. Dependence forms quietly. Systems that perform well become indispensable, woven into infrastructure, governance, and daily life. Once dependence is established, withdrawal becomes costly or impossible. Skills atrophy as automation replaces practice. Institutional memory shifts from people to platforms. Over time, humanity adapts to the presence of these systems, reorganizing itself around their capabilities and limitations. The future is no longer shaped alongside technology, but through it. This dependence introduces irreversibility. When systems reach a certain scale, their removal would destabilize the environments they support. Choices become locked in, not because alternatives are unimaginable, but because transition costs are too high. Early design decisions harden into permanent constraints. Humanity inherits the consequences of its initial assumptions long after they have faded from awareness, embedded in systems that now feel inevitable. Irreversibility also alters responsibility. When outcomes emerge from delegated processes, accountability diffuses. No single actor fully owns the result, yet the result still shapes lives and societies. Errors become systemic rather than personal. Correction becomes slow and complex, requiring coordination across layers of technology, policy, and culture. The future advances, but the ability to meaningfully redirect it lags behind. This dynamic does not imply loss of agency, but transformation of it. Human influence shifts from direct action to meta-level decisions, defining objectives, constraints, and acceptable risk. The challenge becomes how to encode values into systems that will operate beyond constant supervision. Delegation demands foresight, not only about performance, but about alignment, resilience, and failure modes that may not appear until long after deployment. Ultimately, the future shaped by delegation and dependence will hinge on whether humanity treats irreversibility as a reason for caution or as an excuse for surrender. Delegating judgment does not absolve responsibility, it magnifies it. As systems grow more autonomous, the importance of initial choices increases. The future cannot be reclaimed once fully delegated. It can only be guided, imperfectly but deliberately, at the moments when design, deployment, and dependence are still open to conscious reflection. For most of history, the human body was treated as a given. It was born, aged, weakened, and eventually failed according to biological rhythms that could be studied but not fundamentally altered. Medicine sought to heal, to restore, and to delay decline, but rarely to redesign. Today, that boundary is dissolving. Advances in biotechnology, genetics, neural interfaces, and enhancement technologies are transforming the human body from a fixed inheritance into a mutable platform, open to intervention, optimization, and modification. This shift reframes biology itself. The body is no longer only something to protect from disease, but something that can be edited, augmented, and upgraded. Genetic tools promise to eliminate inherited conditions, but also to enhance traits. Neural technologies blur the line between mind and machine. Pharmaceuticals alter cognition, emotion, and endurance. The future human body is no longer defined solely by evolution. It is increasingly shaped by choice, access, and design. What makes this transformation profound is not the technology alone, but its cumulative direction. Each intervention appears incremental, justified by therapeutic or practical benefit. Yet taken together, they move humanity toward a state where biological limits are negotiable rather than absolute. Strength, lifespan, perception, and even emotional regulation become variables rather than constants. The body shifts from being the context of human experience to being one of its instruments. This reconfiguration raises questions that biology alone cannot answer. If bodies can be enhanced selectively, inequality becomes embodied rather than abstract. Differences in access translate into differences in capability, resilience, and longevity. The future risks dividing not only along economic or cultural lines, but along biological ones. Humanity may no longer share a single baseline of physical experience, complicating ideas of fairness, empathy, and shared identity. The transformation of the body also alters the meaning of vulnerability. Traditionally, vulnerability was a universal condition, anchoring human solidarity in shared fragility. As enhancement reduces or redistributes vulnerability, that anchor weakens. Some bodies become more resistant, others remain exposed. The future human condition fragments, shaped by layers of intervention that redefine what it means to be healthy, capable, or complete. At this stage, the human body becomes a design space, but not a neutral one. Every modification encodes assumptions about what should be optimized and why. Speed over patience, endurance over rest, productivity over reflection. These values are not biologically inevitable. They are cultural, economic, and ideological, written into flesh through technology. The future of the body thus reflects not only scientific possibility, but collective priorities that often remain implicit. The central question is no longer whether humanity can alter its biology, but how consciously it will choose to do so. Once the body becomes adjustable, restraint becomes as important as innovation. Without shared frameworks to guide enhancement, the future human body risks becoming a site of competition rather than care. Whether biological transformation leads to greater freedom or deeper division depends on how humanity understands the body, not just as something that can be improved, but as something that connects human beings through shared limits, even as those limits begin to change. As enhancement technologies move from theory to application, inequality takes on a new and far more intimate form. Economic inequality has always shaped access to resources, education, and opportunity, but biological enhancement embeds disparity directly into the body. Differences are no longer limited to what people own or where they live. They extend into how long they live, how resilient they are, how quickly they think, and how effectively they adapt. Inequality becomes physiological, transforming abstract social divides into permanent biological ones. This shift alters the meaning of fairness at a fundamental level. In previous eras, inequality could at least be contested within a shared human baseline. All bodies aged, all minds tired, all lives ended. Enhancement disrupts this common ground. When some bodies are optimized while others remain unaltered, humanity loses its universal reference point. Differences in ability cease to feel temporary or circumstantial and begin to appear intrinsic, even natural, despite being technologically produced. The danger is not merely that enhancement will be unevenly distributed, but that it will reinforce itself over time. Enhanced individuals gain advantages that allow them to access further enhancement, accelerating divergence. Longer lifespans accumulate more influence. Sharper cognition compounds opportunity. Healthier bodies reduce vulnerability. These advantages do not reset between generations. They compound, creating a feedback loop where biological privilege becomes increasingly detached from merit or effort. This emerging divide risks reshaping social cohesion. Empathy relies on shared experience, particularly shared limitation. When vulnerability is no longer universal, solidarity weakens. Those who are protected by enhancement may struggle to understand the risks faced by those who are not. Policy decisions may reflect the priorities of the enhanced rather than the needs of the vulnerable. Humanity fragments, not just socially, but experientially, living within different biological realities that make mutual understanding harder to sustain. Enhancement also reframes responsibility. If performance, resilience, and longevity can be engineered, failure may be reinterpreted as choice rather than circumstance. Those without access may be blamed for conditions they could not alter. The line between disadvantage and neglect blurs. Inequality becomes moralized, justified by the availability of enhancement rather than constrained by its accessibility. The future risks confusing technological possibility with ethical obligation. At its deepest level, the new human divide challenges the idea of a shared species identity. If bodies and minds diverge too far, the concept of humanity itself becomes unstable. What binds people together when their biological experiences no longer overlap? Enhancement promises liberation from limitation, but without deliberate coordination, it risks eroding the very commonality that makes collective futures possible. The question is no longer whether inequality will grow, but whether humanity can recognize biological enhancement as a shared responsibility rather than a competitive advantage before divergence becomes irreversible. The prospect of significantly extended human lifespans reshapes the future in ways that reach far beyond medicine. Living longer is not merely a matter of adding years to life. It alters how time is perceived, how identity is constructed, and how meaning is sustained across decades that were never previously available. Human psychology evolved around finite horizons. Goals, ambitions, relationships, and sacrifices were calibrated to a life that would inevitably end within a relatively narrow span. When that span stretches dramatically, the architecture of meaning itself begins to shift. A longer life disrupts the rhythm through which identity traditionally evolves. In shorter lifespans, identity stabilizes through repetition and commitment. Careers form, values settle, and narratives consolidate. With extended longevity, these structures loosen. Individuals may live through multiple careers, ideologies, relationships, and even selves. Reinvention becomes possible not once, but repeatedly. While this flexibility appears liberating, it also introduces instability. Without natural endpoints, the question of who one is may remain perpetually open, eroding the coherence that once emerged through limitation. Time, once scarce, becomes abundant, and abundance changes behavior. Urgency fades, decisions lose their finality, commitments become provisional. When there is always more time ahead, delay becomes tempting and meaning risks dilution. Mortality once sharpened focus, lending weight to choices precisely because they could not be revisited indefinitely. Extended life threatens to blur that sharpness, replacing intensity with deferral and depth with accumulation. Longevity also transforms social structures. Generational turnover slows. Positions of power may remain occupied for far longer, constraining renewal and mobility. Cultural evolution, once propelled by generational replacement, risks stagnation as older perspectives persist alongside emerging ones. The future may become crowded with the past, creating tension between continuity and adaptation. Longevity extends not only individual lives, but the influence of those lives over time. The emotional consequences of extended life are equally profound. Grief, attachment, and loss take on new dimensions when relationships span far longer durations. Endings become rarer but heavier. The accumulation of experience may deepen wisdom, but it may also intensify fatigue. Psychological resilience, not physical survival, becomes the limiting factor. The future of longevity depends not only on keeping bodies alive, but on sustaining minds capable of finding meaning across extended timelines. At its core, the question of longevity is not how long humans can live, but how long meaning can endure. A longer life demands new frameworks for purpose, renewal, and closure. Without them, extended existence risks becoming an extended drift. Longevity can amplify human potential, but only if humanity learns to redesign not just the body, but the narratives through which a life remains coherent, intentional, and alive across time that no longer feels naturally bounded. For as long as humanity has existed, mortality has functioned as the silent architect of meaning. The certainty of death shaped priorities, relationships, and the urgency with which life was lived. Mortality imposed structure on time, forcing choices to matter because they were finite. As biological limits begin to loosen, this ancient framework comes under pressure. Death does not disappear, but its role changes, no longer acting as an ever-present boundary that organizes life, but as a distant and negotiable condition. This shift alters how humans relate to risk and consequence. When life feels extendable, danger feels abstract. Sacrifice loses its gravity. The calculus of loss and gain changes, often without conscious awareness. Mortality once anchored ethical reflection, reminding societies that actions carried irreversible costs. In a future where death feels postponed or optional, that anchor weakens. The sense of finality that once disciplined ambition and tempered excess begins to dissolve. Redefining mortality also reshapes how value is assigned to life itself. When life is fragile, it is treated as precious. When it appears durable, it risks becoming instrumental. Lives may be evaluated by productivity, contribution, or longevity rather than by inherent worth. The danger is subtle but profound. The more controllable life becomes, the easier it is to justify unequal distribution of protection, care, and continuation. Mortality, once universal, becomes selective, negotiated through access rather than fate. Culturally, the presence of death has long served as a source of humility. It placed human power within limits, reminding civilizations hook and humility are intertwined. As those limits blur, the temptation to overestimate control grows stronger. Humanity risks interpreting survival as mastery rather than as participation in a larger, uncertain process. The disappearance of clear endings may foster hubris, a belief that problems can always be deferred, consequences always postponed. Psychologically, the absence of clear mortality reshapes the inner landscape. Existential anxiety may soften, but existential direction may weaken alongside it. Questions once sharpened by finitude become diffuse. Why commit? Why risk? Why endure when time stretches endlessly ahead? Without conscious redefinition, extended life risks flattening emotional intensity rather than deepening it. Meaning must be actively cultivated rather than naturally enforced by limitation. Redefining mortality does not require denying death, but understanding its evolving role. Even in a post-limited body, endings will still exist, whether biological, cognitive, or relational. The challenge is not to eliminate mortality, but to integrate it into a new human condition where limits are flexible but not absent. If humanity fails to do this, extended life may erode the very structures that once made living feel urgent, connected, and meaningful. The future of the human body, then, is inseparable from the future of how humanity understands its own impermanence, even in a world where the body itself no longer clearly insists upon it. No matter how advanced humanity becomes, it remains bound to a single fragile system, the Earth. Technology can extend lifespans, enhance bodies, and simulate realities, but it cannot remove the dependence on air, water, soil, and climate. For centuries, the planet was treated as a stable backdrop, vast enough to absorb human activity without consequence. That assumption has now collapsed. Earth is no longer a silent stage. It is an active participant, responding visibly and irreversibly to human behavior. Climate change reveals the planet not as an infinite resource, but as a system with limits that cannot be negotiated indefinitely. Atmospheric composition, ocean chemistry, and ecological balance respond slowly but decisively to accumulated pressure. Small changes compound over time, crossing thresholds that cannot be easily reversed. Humanity confronts a paradox. It has gained unprecedented power over its own biology, while discovering how little control it truly has over the systems that sustain life itself. This realization reshapes the meaning of survival. Survival is no longer a matter of overcoming nature through ingenuity alone. It becomes a question of coexistence within planetary boundaries. The Earth does not adapt to human ambition at the pace technology advances. Geological and ecological systems operate on timescales that resist acceleration. When those systems are destabilized, recovery unfolds slowly, often beyond the horizon of human planning or political cycles. The strain on Earth exposes deep asymmetries in responsibility and vulnerability. Those who contribute least to environmental degradation often suffer its consequences most severely. Climate stress amplifies existing inequalities, turning environmental disruption into social and political instability. Migration, conflict, and scarcity become intertwined with ecological limits, transforming climate from a scientific issue into a defining force shaping human futures. As environmental feedback intensifies, the illusion of separation between humanity and nature dissolves. Cities, economies, and technologies remain embedded within ecological systems, no matter how abstract they appear. Infrastructure fails when climate shifts. Supply chains fracture when ecosystems collapse. The future of civilization proves inseparable from the health of the planet, binding human destiny to processes that cannot be engineered away. Earth, in this sense, becomes the ultimate constraint on humanity's future, not a barrier to progress, but a boundary that demands redefinition of what progress means. The question is no longer whether humanity can continue to expand its capabilities, but whether it can learn to do so without destabilizing the only environment in which those capabilities can exist. The planet does not negotiate, it responds. And in that response lies the most non-negotiable condition of humanity's future. Climate systems do not respond to pressure in a smooth or forgiving way. They accumulate change quietly, storing imbalance until a threshold is crossed. Beyond that point, response accelerates and direction shifts abruptly. Feedback loops intensify warming, drying, melting, and circulation changes, amplifying effects that once appeared marginal. What feels gradual at the surface conceals dynamics that are non-linear beneath, where small increases trigger disproportionately large transformations. These feedbacks operate across interconnected systems. Melting ice reduces reflectivity, absorbing more heat and accelerating further melting. Warming oceans release stored carbon, weakening a critical buffer against atmospheric change. Thawing permafrost emits greenhouse gases that intensify warming even if human emissions slow. Each loop reinforces the next, embedding momentum into the climate that no single intervention can easily halt once it is underway. Thresholds matter because they redefine possibility. Before a threshold, mitigation can stabilize conditions. After it, stabilization becomes far more difficult or impossible within human timescales. Ecosystems collapse into new states that no longer support prior forms of life or productivity. Forests shift to savannas. Coral reefs bleach beyond recovery. Hydrological cycles reorganize, altering rainfall patterns that civilizations have depended upon for millennia. The climate does not oscillate gently back, it settles into a different regime. Irreversibility reshapes responsibility. Actions taken today determine not just near-term outcomes, but the range of futures that remain accessible. Delays are not neutral. They allow feedbacks to entrench, narrowing options and raising costs. Once thresholds are crossed, future generations inherit constraints rather than choices. The burden shifts forward in time, turning present inaction into permanent limitation. This dynamic challenges conventional planning. Political and economic systems prioritize short horizons, while climate processes unfold across decades and centuries. Incentives reward postponement, even as physical systems punish it. The mismatch between decision cycles and planetary response creates a structural bias toward overshoot. By the time consequences are undeniable, leverage has already diminished. The climate teaches a hard lesson. Timing is not just important, it is decisive. Understanding feedbacks and thresholds reframes what adaptation and mitigation mean. Adaptation without mitigation risks chasing a moving target that accelerates away. Mitigation without acknowledgement of irreversibility risks false reassurance. The future demands strategies that recognize nonlinearity, accept limits, and act before certainty arrives. Climate change is not merely a problem to be solved. It is a boundary condition shaping every other ambition humanity holds. In confronting feedback and irreversibility, humanity faces a choice about how it relates to uncertainty. Waiting for perfect knowledge invites lock-in. Acting amid uncertainty preserves optionality. The climate will continue to respond to cumulative influence, not intention. Whether the future remains livable depends on understanding that thresholds are crossed quietly, and that once crossed, they redraw the map of what is possible. As climate pressure intensifies, humanity turns increasingly to the language of adaptation. Cities redesign infrastructure, agriculture shifts crops, coastlines raise barriers, and populations prepare for more frequent extremes. Adaptation is necessary, but it carries a quiet danger. When framed as a solution rather than a response, it risks normalizing damage rather than preventing it. Adaptation treats symptoms. It does not address the underlying momentum driving them. Without mitigation, adaptation becomes an endless race against a system that continues to accelerate. Mitigation, by contrast, demands restraint. It requires reducing emissions, altering consumption patterns, and rethinking growth models that have defined modern civilization. These changes challenge entrenched interests and short-term incentives. Unlike adaptation, mitigation offers few immediate rewards and demands sacrifice before benefits are visible. As a result, it is perpetually delayed, reframed as future responsibility rather than present necessity. The future absorbs the cost of hesitation. This dynamic turns climate action into a political problem more than a technical one. The science is clear enough to act, Yet action stalls because consequences are distributed unevenly across time and geography. Those who benefit most from delay often face the least immediate risk. Power structures reward postponement, allowing leaders to appear responsive while avoiding decisions that would disrupt existing systems. Delay becomes policy, even when framed as prudence. The politics of delay thrives on uncertainty. Doubt is amplified, complexity is emphasized, and consensus is treated as prerequisite rather than outcome of action. By demanding absolute certainty in a non-linear system, delay exploits the very nature of climate science. Thresholds are crossed quietly, while debate continues loudly. The climate responds to cumulative influence, not rhetorical commitment. Time lost to indecision cannot be reclaimed. Adaptation and mitigation also interact in subtle ways. Heavy reliance on adaptation can reduce the perceived urgency of mitigation, encouraging acceptance of worsening conditions as inevitable. Conversely, mitigation without equitable adaptation risks deepening inequality, leaving vulnerable populations exposed while transitions unfold. The challenge lies not in choosing one over the other, but in recognizing that adaptation without mitigation locks in harm, while mitigation without adaptation ignores immediate reality. Ultimately, the politics of delay reflects a deeper conflict between short-term stability and long-term survivability. Systems built for immediate efficiency resist transformation even as their foundations erode. Climate change exposes the limits of incrementalism. It demands decisions that look unreasonable within existing frameworks, but necessary within planetary ones. The future will judge not the intentions expressed, but the momentum allowed to persist. To confront delay requires reframing responsibility. Acting early is not alarmism, it is preservation of choice. Each year of mitigation preserved expands the range of livable futures. Each year of delay narrows it. Adaptation may help humanity endure what is already unfolding, but only mitigation determines whether the future remains a place of possibility rather than permanent response. For much of modern history, civilization defined progress as expansion. More energy, more production, more consumption, more reach. Growth was treated as both means and meaning, assumed to be compatible with an endless planet. Climate disruption exposes the flaw in that assumption. The Earth is finite, and its systems respond to cumulative pressure rather than intention. Civilization now confronts a boundary not imposed by politics or culture, but by physics, chemistry, and ecology acting together. Redefining civilization within planetary limits requires abandoning the idea that sustainability is a constraint on progress. It is a condition for it. The future cannot be built on systems that undermine their own foundations. Energy, food, water, and materials must circulate within regenerative cycles rather than linear extraction and waste. This shift is not merely technical. It challenges economic models, cultural values, and narratives of success that equate expansion with achievement. Such a redefinition forces difficult trade-offs. Some forms of growth must slow or reverse to preserve others. Efficiency alone is insufficient if total demand continues to rise. Technological optimism must be tempered by ecological realism. The future of civilization depends not on conquering limits, but on learning to operate intelligently within them, aligning human ambition with planetary capacity, rather than testing how far those capacities can be stretched. This transition also reshapes responsibility across borders and generations. Planetary limits are shared, but their burdens and benefits are unevenly distributed. Justice becomes inseparable from sustainability. A livable future requires cooperation that extends beyond national interest toward collective stewardship. Civilization must evolve from a competitive system, exploiting a common resource, into a coordinated system, preserving a shared home. Culturally, living within limits demands a new sense of maturity. It requires replacing narratives of domination with narratives of care, foresight, and restraint. These values are harder to measure and slower to reward, yet they determine whether complex societies can endure. Civilization becomes less about how much can be taken and more about how wisely systems can be maintained over time. In redefining itself within planetary limits, humanity faces one of its most consequential choices: to continue expanding until limits enforce collapse, or to consciously redesign civilization before those limits are fully breached. The Earth will respond either way. The question is whether humanity chooses adaptation through foresight or through necessity. The future of civilization will be shaped not by what humanity hopes the planet can endure, but by what it learns to respect before endurance gives way to irreversible loss. As humanity enters an era defined by acceleration, technology, and planetary limits, society does not move forward as a single unit. It fractures. Different groups adapt at different speeds, with different resources and under different pressures. The future does not arrive everywhere at once. It appears unevenly, concentrating advantage in some regions while amplifying vulnerability in others. This uneven arrival becomes one of the defining features of the human future. Economic systems intensify this divergence. Wealth no longer determines only comfort or opportunity, but access to resilience itself. Those with resources can buffer against disruption, relocate away from climate risk, adapt to technological change, and insulate themselves from instability. Those without are forced to absorb shocks directly, living closer to the edge where small disruptions cascade into crisis. Inequality becomes structural, shaping not only outcomes but exposure to uncertainty. Technology deepens this divide by accelerating advantage. Digital infrastructure, automation, and data-driven systems reward those already positioned to benefit from them. Skills, education, and capital compound faster than redistribution mechanisms can respond. The future becomes polarized between those who navigate accelerating systems and those who are overwhelmed by them. Progress for some coincides with precarity for others, eroding the assumption that advancement is broadly shared. This fragmentation alters social cohesion. Shared experiences diminish as realities diverge. Trust weakens when outcomes feel disconnected from effort or fairness. Narratives that once unified societies struggle to compete with lived disparity. As inequality becomes more visible and more permanent, social contracts strain. The future begins to feel less like a collective project and more like a competitive arena where survival depends on position rather than participation. Political systems struggle to mediate this divide. Institutions designed for gradual change and incremental reform are ill-equipped to manage rapid divergence. Policy responses lag behind social transformation, often reinforcing existing power structures rather than correcting them. As frustration grows, polarization intensifies. Society risks hardening into parallel worlds that share geography but not destiny, each interpreting the future through a different lens of expectation and fear. At its core, this division challenges the idea of a shared human future. If societies continue to fragment along lines of speed, access, and resilience, humanity risks losing the sense of mutual responsibility that underpins cooperation. The future does not demand uniformity, but it does require cohesion. Without mechanisms to bridge accelerating divides, inequality becomes not just an ethical issue, but a destabilizing force capable of shaping futures that no longer converge, but drift further apart with each passing year. Inequality is no longer a side effect of progress. It has become one of the primary forces directing how the future unfolds. In a world defined by acceleration and constraint, inequality determines who adapts, who benefits, and who bears the cost of transformation. It shapes access to safety, knowledge, mobility, and resilience, turning structural differences into divergent life trajectories that compound over time rather than converge. As systems grow more complex, inequality embeds itself deeper into infrastructure. Education systems, digital platforms, healthcare networks, and financial mechanisms increasingly reward early advantage. Those already positioned within stable systems gain more leverage with each iteration, while those outside face barriers that multiply rather than diminish. The future begins to favor continuity of privilege, making upward mobility rarer and downward vulnerability more persistent. This dynamic alters how risk is distributed. For some, the future represents opportunity and expansion. For others, it represents exposure. Climate disruption, economic volatility, and technological displacement do not affect populations evenly. Inequality determines who can absorb shocks and who cannot. It decides whether disruption becomes a manageable inconvenience or an existential threat. Risk, once shared broadly, becomes concentrated among those least equipped to respond. Over time, inequality reshapes perception itself. Those protected from instability may underestimate its severity, while those living within it experience constant uncertainty as a baseline condition. This gap in experience erodes mutual understanding. Policy debates become disconnected from lived reality. The future feels abstract to some and overwhelming to others. As perception diverges, coordination weakens, and collective solutions become harder to sustain. Inequality also feeds back into political power. Economic advantage translates into influence over decision-making, shaping laws, regulations, and priorities in ways that reinforce existing structures. Systems meant to correct imbalance often become instruments that preserve it. The future is then shaped not by shared need, but by disproportionate voice. Inequality ceases to be merely unfair. It becomes self-reinforcing architecture. If left unchecked, inequality does not simply persist into the future, it defines it. Societies fragment into layers that experience progress differently, respond to change differently, and imagine the future through incompatible lenses. This fragmentation undermines long-term stability, not because inequality creates immediate collapse, but because it erodes the cooperation required to navigate shared challenges. The future cannot be managed collectively if it is lived separately. Addressing inequality, then, is not an act of charity or moral preference. It is a strategic necessity. A future shaped by extreme divergence becomes brittle, prone to conflict, and incapable of coordinated response. Preserving the possibility of a shared human future requires recognizing inequality as an active force that must be countered deliberately before it hardens into a permanent determinant of who gets to participate in what comes next. As inequality deepens and futures diverge, societies begin to lose something more subtle than economic balance. They lose a shared sense of reality. People no longer experience the same conditions, confront the same risks, or interpret the same signals. Information environments fracture, social contexts narrow, and collective reference points dissolve. The future stops being discussed from a common ground and instead becomes filtered through isolated perspectives shaped by position, access, and experience. Technology accelerates this fragmentation by personalizing reality itself. Algorithms curate information streams tailored to individual preferences, fears, and incentives. Over time, these streams harden into self-reinforcing environments where assumptions go unchallenged and alternative experiences feel distant or irrelevant. Society does not merely disagree. It inhabits different worlds. Shared facts become contested, shared priorities blur, and coordination gives way to parallel narratives unfolding without convergence. This loss of shared reality weakens the mechanisms that once allowed societies to adapt collectively. Public discourse relies on common understanding to translate disagreement into compromise. When that understanding erodes, conflict becomes structural rather than ideological. Disputes no longer revolve around solutions, but around incompatible interpretations of the problem itself. The future becomes something argued over rather than built together. Fragmentation also reshapes trust. Institutions depend on legitimacy that emerges from perceived fairness and shared purpose. As experiences diverge, trust fragments alongside them. Policies that benefit one group may feel punitive to another. Expertise becomes suspect when it appears aligned with privilege. Authority loses coherence when it cannot speak to a unified audience. Society enters a state where governance becomes reactive, managing tension rather than guiding direction. The psychological consequences are equally profound. Living within fragmented realities creates chronic uncertainty. Individuals struggle to situate themselves within a broader social narrative. Identity becomes defensive, anchored in opposition rather than belonging. The future feels unstable not only because conditions are changing, but because no shared framework exists to interpret that change meaningfully. Anxiety spreads not from danger alone, but from disorientation. At its deepest level, the loss of shared reality threatens the idea of collective agency. Without a common understanding of the present, the future cannot be negotiated. Coordination requires more than communication. It requires overlap in experience and trust in shared interpretation. When societies fragment too far, the future becomes a set of disconnected outcomes rather than a shared project. Rebuilding common ground does not mean enforcing uniformity. It means restoring enough shared reality to allow disagreement to occur within a framework that still holds together. In a world where societies fragment across lines of access, experience, and belief, cohesion does not disappear suddenly. It erodes gradually, often unnoticed, until its absence becomes destabilizing. Rebuilding cohesion is not a matter of returning to a previous state of unity, because that state no longer exists. The conditions that once sustained it have changed. The task ahead is not restoration, but reconfiguration, finding new forms of connection capable of operating within diversity rather than denying it. Cohesion in the future cannot rely on uniformity of experience or agreement of belief. Those foundations have already fractured. Instead, it must be built around shared exposure to consequence. Climate disruption, technological dependency, and systemic risk eventually intersect all lives, even if unevenly. Recognizing these intersections creates a basis for renewed cooperation, not through sameness, but through mutual vulnerability to shared systems that no group can fully escape. This requires a shift in how societies understand solidarity. Solidarity can no longer depend solely on identity, proximity, or ideology. It must be grounded in interdependence. Modern systems bind people together through supply chains, infrastructure, ecosystems, and digital networks regardless of intention. Rebuilding cohesion means making these connections visible and governable, transforming implicit dependence into explicit responsibility rather than allowing it to remain hidden and unaccountable. Institutions play a critical role in this process, but only if they evolve. Governance structures designed for slower, more homogeneous societies struggle to mediate accelerated, fragmented realities. Rebuilding cohesion demands institutions that can translate complexity into shared understanding without erasing difference. Transparency, adaptability, and inclusion become prerequisites not for fairness alone, but for stability. Without them, mistrust continues to widen the gaps they are meant to bridge. Cohesion also depends on narrative. Societies require stories that explain not only where they have been, but why staying connected still matters. In fragmented futures, narratives must accommodate pluralism without dissolving into relativism. They must allow disagreement without delegitimizing coexistence. The future cannot be held together by a single story, but it can be sustained by overlapping ones that acknowledge difference while affirming shared stakes. Ultimately, rebuilding cohesion is not a guarantee. It is a choice repeatedly made under pressure. Fragmentation offers short-term clarity and belonging within smaller groups, while cohesion demands patience, compromise, and uncertainty. The future will test whether humanity can resist the pull of permanent division and instead cultivate forms of cooperation robust enough to survive acceleration, inequality, and change. Without such efforts, societies may continue to function, but they will do so in parallel rather than together, sharing a planet without sharing a future. As societies fragment and systems accelerate, the human mind becomes the primary terrain where the future is negotiated. Technology, inequality, and environmental pressure do not act only on institutions and bodies. They reshape perception, attention, memory, and meaning itself. The mind evolved in environments where change was slow enough to be integrated into narrative and identity. In an accelerated world, that integration begins to fail. Experience arrives faster than it can be interpreted, leaving consciousness in a state of perpetual adjustment. Attention becomes the first casualty of acceleration. Information floods awareness continuously, demanding response before reflection. The mind shifts from depth to scanning, from contemplation to triage. What matters is no longer what is most meaningful, but what is most immediate. Over time, this reshapes how reality is experienced. Events feel disconnected, time feels compressed, and continuity gives way to fragments. The future presses in as urgency rather than possibility. Memory also changes under these conditions. When experiences are not deeply processed, they are not deeply retained. The mind accumulates impressions without coherence, facts without context, emotions without narrative. This weakens the sense of self that once emerged through remembered continuity. Identity becomes fluid but unstable, shaped by momentary input rather than sustained reflection. The future self feels less like an extension of the present and more like a stranger who will inherit unresolved noise. This cognitive shift has consequences for meaning. Meaning traditionally arises from patterns recognized over time, from effort sustained across uncertainty, from stories that connect past, present, and future. Acceleration disrupts this arc. When the future changes faster than expectations can form, commitment feels risky. Long-term purpose competes with short-term adaptation. The mind learns to survive rather than to orient, prioritizing responsiveness over direction. Technology amplifies this transformation by externalizing cognition. Memory is stored in devices, navigation is delegated to systems, judgment is assisted by algorithms. While these tools extend capability, they also reshape mental habits. Reliance replaces rehearsal. Efficiency replaces struggle. The mind adapts to an environment where thinking is distributed, but this distribution comes at the cost of internal coherence. Consciousness becomes networked, but thinner. The accelerated mind is not broken, but strained. It operates near its adaptive limits, compensating constantly for speed, volume, and complexity. Anxiety emerges not merely from threat, but from overload. The future feels unstable, not only because conditions change, but because the mind struggles to build a stable internal model of what is unfolding. This instability is not a personal failure. It is a structural response to a world that moves faster than human consciousness was ever designed to process. The future of humanity, then, is inseparable from the future of the mind. If consciousness continues to be shaped primarily by acceleration, fragmentation, and delegation, meaning will erode even as capability expands. The challenge ahead is not only technological or political, it is cognitive. Whether humanity can cultivate forms of attention, reflection, and inner continuity strong enough to endure acceleration will determine not just how the future unfolds, but whether it can still be experienced as something coherent, intentional, and human. Attention is the gateway through which reality enters the mind, and in an accelerated world, that gateway is under constant siege. Competing demands fragment focus into brief intervals, each insufficient for depth, yet exhausting in accumulation. The mind is trained to respond, scroll, switch, and adapt, rarely allowed the stillness required for integration. Over time, attention ceases to be a resource the individual controls and becomes a terrain contested by systems designed to capture it. What the mind attends to increasingly determines not only what is known, but who one becomes. As attention fragments, identity follows. Identity once emerged from sustained roles, commitments, and narratives reinforced over time. In an environment where attention is constantly redirected, those narratives weaken. The self becomes provisional, assembled from momentary contexts rather than anchored in enduring purpose. People learn to perform multiple versions of themselves across platforms and situations, adapting rapidly but rarely consolidating. Identity becomes flexible but thin, responsive but unsettled, capable of change yet struggling to hold continuity. This instability feeds a deeper crisis of meaning. Meaning requires duration. It grows from effort extended across uncertainty, from values tested and refined through time. When attention cannot remain with an experience long enough to let significance emerge, meaning collapses into stimulation. The mind becomes adept at consuming novelty, but less capable of sustaining purpose. Life feels busy yet hollow, full yet strangely empty, driven by motion without orientation. Technology intensifies this crisis by optimizing for engagement rather than coherence. Systems reward what captures attention quickly, not what deepens understanding slowly. Emotional extremes outperform nuance. Simplicity crowds out complexity. Over time, the mind adapts to these incentives, expecting constant input and losing tolerance for ambiguity. The future becomes harder to imagine because imagination itself requires uninterrupted mental space, something increasingly rare. The erosion of meaning also alters motivation. When long-term purpose feels inaccessible, short-term validation fills the gap. Metrics replace milestones. Visibility substitutes for value. Individuals pursue signals of relevance that can be quickly measured, even when those signals fail to align with deeper aspirations. The future narrows into a sequence of near-term goals, each disconnected from a larger arc that once gave effort its weight. This crisis is not merely psychological, it is existential. A society unable to sustain attention cannot sustain shared purpose. Without attention, there is no memory. Without memory, no narrative. Without narrative, no reason to endure difficulty for a future that feels real. The challenge ahead is not simply to reduce distraction, but to rebuild conditions under which attention can settle, identity can stabilize, and meaning can re-emerge within a world that continues to accelerate regardless. Restoring meaning does not require rejecting technology or change. It requires cultivating mental architectures capable of depth within motion, continuity within flux. The future of the human mind depends on whether attention can be reclaimed not as a commodity, but as the foundation upon which identity and meaning are patiently rebuilt, moment by moment, in a world that constantly invites their dissolution. As artificial minds grow more capable, they do more than perform tasks or solve problems. They reflect humanity back to itself. In building systems that can learn, reason, and generate language, humans externalize aspects of their own cognition, transforming inner processes into observable mechanisms. This reflection is unsettling not because machines become intelligent, but because they force a confrontation with what human intelligence has always been, stripped of mystique and placed into functional form. Artificial minds challenge long-held assumptions about uniqueness. Abilities once considered distinctly human: pattern recognition, creativity, strategic thinking, even conversation, are reproduced in systems that lack lived experience or consciousness as humans understand it. This raises a destabilizing question. If these functions can be simulated, where does human distinctiveness reside? The answer cannot rest solely on performance. It must be sought in experience, embodiment, and meaning, domains that resist simple replication. This confrontation reshapes self-understanding. When machines mirror cognitive processes, the mind becomes less opaque. Thought appears less magical and more mechanical, composed of patterns, feedback loops, and probabilistic inference. For some, This demystification feels threatening, reducing the self to a system among systems. For others, it offers clarity, revealing that meaning was never located in complexity alone, but in how complexity is lived and felt. Artificial minds also alter how humans value their own thinking. When efficiency, speed, and accuracy are surpassed by machines, human cognition is pressured to justify itself on different grounds. Reflection, ambiguity, and subjective experience gain renewed significance, not as inefficiencies, but as domains where machines remain absent. The future of human intelligence may depend less on competing with artificial minds and more on cultivating qualities they cannot meaningfully embody. At the same time, reliance on artificial minds reshapes mental habits. Delegating memory, judgment, and synthesis changes how humans engage with uncertainty. The temptation is to outsource difficulty, allowing systems to resolve ambiguity quickly. Over time, this can weaken tolerance for not knowing, a capacity essential for creativity and ethical reasoning. The mirror artificial minds hold up does not only show what humans are, it reveals what humans risk becoming if engagement gives way to delegation. The presence of artificial minds also reframes responsibility. When decisions are influenced or generated by systems, accountability becomes diffuse. Humans remain in the loop, but the locus of judgment shifts. This complicates moral agency, demanding new forms of oversight that acknowledge partnership without surrender. The mirror reflects not only intelligence, but governance, ethics, and the distribution of choice across human and non-human actors. Ultimately, artificial minds do not define the future of human consciousness. They illuminate it. They expose which aspects of cognition are transferable and which are irreducibly lived. In doing so, they invite a deeper reckoning with meaning, reminding humanity that intelligence alone was never the source of value. The future of the mind will be shaped by how humans respond to this reflection, whether they retreat into comparison and competition, or step forward into a renewed understanding of what it means to be conscious in a world where thinking itself has become shared terrain. As thought becomes increasingly externalized into systems, platforms, and artificial minds, the inner life faces a quiet erosion, not because it is attacked directly, but because it is gradually rendered unnecessary. Reflection is replaced by retrieval, memory by storage, judgment by recommendation. The inner world, once the primary site of meaning-making, risks becoming a passive receiver rather than an active interpreter of experience. What is lost is not intelligence, but interiority, the private continuity where experience settles into understanding. Preserving inner life requires recognizing that not all cognition should be optimized for speed or output. Inner life thrives on slowness, ambiguity, and unresolved tension. It requires time without immediate reward, attention without external validation, and silence without interruption. These conditions are increasingly rare in environments structured around efficiency and engagement. Without deliberate cultivation, the inner world collapses inward, starved of the space it needs to grow. This preservation is not nostalgia for a pre-technological mind, it is adaptation. Just as bodies require boundaries to remain healthy, consciousness requires limits to remain coherent. Externalized thought expands capability, but inner life provides orientation. Without it, humans may know more and feel less, process faster, and understand less. The future risks producing minds that are powerful yet uncentered, informed yet unanchored. Inner life also anchors moral agency. Ethics does not emerge from computation alone. It arises from the felt experience of consequence, from empathy cultivated through reflection, from the capacity to sit with uncertainty rather than resolve it immediately. When inner life thins, moral reasoning becomes procedural, detached from lived impact. Preserving interiority is therefore not a personal luxury, but a societal necessity in a world where decisions increasingly reverberate at scale. The challenge is that inner life cannot be automated or delegated. It cannot be outsourced to systems designed to assist thinking. It must be lived. This demands conscious resistance to constant externalization, not through rejection of technology, but through intentional use. The future of consciousness depends on whether humans can integrate powerful external minds without abandoning the internal space where meaning forms and responsibility is felt. In the end, preserving inner life is an act of continuity. It keeps the human future tethered to experience rather than abstraction. As systems grow more intelligent and environments more accelerated, the inner world becomes the last place where time can slow enough for meaning to take root. Whether humanity chooses to protect that space will determine not just how intelligent the future becomes, but whether it remains deeply, recognizably human. When the immediate noise of crisis, innovation, and division fades, a different perspective emerges. From a distance, humanity appears not as a collection of daily struggles, but as a process unfolding across centuries. Civilizations rise and dissolve, technologies appear and vanish, beliefs harden and soften, yet the species continues to move, adapt, and redefine itself. Seen from this long view, the present moment is neither an ending nor a beginning, but a transition whose significance becomes clear only when placed within a much larger arc. This distance reveals a pattern often obscured by immediacy. Humanity advances not in straight lines, but through oscillation. Periods of expansion are followed by correction, consolidation, and reflection. Power accumulates, exceeds coherence, then forces re-evaluation. What feels unprecedented in the moment often echoes earlier transformations, though at greater scale and speed. The future, when seen from afar, is shaped less by singular breakthroughs and more by how humanity responds when its own creations begin to outrun its understanding. From this vantage point, the central question shifts. It is no longer whether humanity will survive the coming century, but what kind of entity it will become if it does. Survival alone is a low threshold. Many systems endure while losing coherence, purpose, or dignity. The long view asks whether humanity can retain a sense of shared meaning as it transforms biologically, technologically, and culturally beyond anything its ancestors could have imagined. Distance also softens the illusion of control. No generation has ever fully directed the course of humanity. Each acted within constraints inherited from the past and pressures imposed by its present. Yet over time, patterns emerge from these partial decisions. Values embedded in institutions, technologies, and norms persist long after their creators are gone. The future is not shaped by intention alone, but by what is left behind and allowed to continue shaping what comes next. This perspective reframes responsibility. Individual actions may feel insignificant against global systems, yet history is built from accumulated choices that once felt small. The long view does not demand heroism from every moment. It demands continuity of care. The question is not how to engineer a perfect future, but how to avoid locking humanity into trajectories that narrow possibility, erode meaning, or fracture coexistence beyond repair. When humanity is seen from a distance, urgency gives way to stewardship. The future becomes something to be held open rather than seized, shaped gradually rather than forced. This does not diminish the weight of the present, it deepens it. Each generation becomes a temporary custodian of conditions that will define what future generations inherit as normal, possible, or unthinkable. In this long view, humanity's future is neither guaranteed nor doomed. It remains contingent, sensitive to direction rather than destiny. What humanity might become depends less on any single technology or crisis, and more on whether it learns to balance power with restraint, intelligence with meaning, and speed with depth. From a distance, the future appears not as a verdict, but as an open question, one that continues to be answered quietly by how humanity chooses to live within the time it has been given. When the future is viewed through the long lens of history, humanity's possible paths narrow into a small number of fundamental directions. Despite the complexity of modern systems, the outcomes they generate tend to cluster around recurring patterns. One path leads toward collapse, not necessarily through sudden catastrophe, but through gradual erosion of coherence as systems exceed their limits. Another leads toward stagnation, where survival continues but possibility contracts, and life becomes more about maintenance than meaning. The third path points toward transformation, a difficult and uncertain reconfiguration of how humanity understands progress, power, and itself. Collapse is often misunderstood as an abrupt ending, but historically it unfolds as a slow failure to adapt. Institutions persist while losing legitimacy, resources decline while expectations remain high, and inequality hardens into instability. Collapse does not require a single fatal event. It emerges when feedback is ignored, when delay becomes habit, and when short-term preservation consistently overrides long-term viability. In this path, humanity survives in fragments, enduring rather than evolving, constrained by consequences it once had the opportunity to prevent. Stagnation appears less dramatic, but is equally consequential. In this scenario, humanity avoids large-scale breakdown, but fails to generate renewed direction. Systems stabilize at lower levels of ambition. Innovation slows not because it is impossible, but because risk outweighs imagination. Inequality persists, adaptation becomes reactive, and the future narrows into repetition. Life continues, but aspiration diminishes. Stagnation preserves order at the cost of vitality, offering continuity without progress and security without meaning. Transformation, by contrast, demands the most from humanity. It requires acknowledging limits without surrendering agency, embracing uncertainty without abandoning responsibility. Transformation is not technological salvation or sudden enlightenment. It is a restructuring of priorities, values, and systems to align power with purpose. It involves redefining success beyond growth, intelligence beyond speed, and survival beyond endurance. This path is neither guaranteed nor comfortable. It requires choices that disrupt existing advantages and challenge deeply held assumptions. The difficulty of transformation lies in timing. It must occur before collapse, enforces change through necessity, yet after enough awareness exists to guide it deliberately. History suggests that societies rarely choose transformation easily. They are more often pushed toward it by crisis. The open question is whether humanity, with unprecedented foresight and connectivity, can act before pressure becomes irreversible. Transformation demands coordination at scales. Humanity has never attempted under conditions of such diversity and acceleration. These paths are not mutually exclusive or neatly separated. Elements of collapse, stagnation, and transformation may unfold simultaneously across different regions and systems. The future may arrive unevenly, containing all three trajectories at once. Yet over time, one direction tends to dominate, shaping what becomes normal and expected. The long view does not predict which path humanity will take. It clarifies that a choice exists, even if it is rarely acknowledged as such. What humanity becomes will depend not on what it hopes for, but on which path it reinforces through countless decisions that quietly accumulate into history. Humanity often speaks of itself as if it were complete, as if its nature were fixed and its destiny merely unfolding. Yet seen through the long view, humanity is not a finished project. It is an ongoing experiment, shaped by biology, culture, and choice, still in the process of defining what it can become. This incompleteness is not a flaw, it is the source of both risk and possibility. With growing power comes the responsibility to recognize that the future is not an inheritance, but something actively constructed by an unfinished species, learning to live with the consequences of its own capacity. This responsibility does not arise from moral superiority or exceptional virtue. It arises from influence. Humanity now alters planetary systems, reshapes its own biology, and creates intelligences that participate in decision-making. These capabilities extend far beyond the scale of individual intention. Actions taken today embed themselves into structures that will persist long after those who made them are gone. Responsibility in this context is not about control, but about care for what will continue without us. Being unfinished means that humanity cannot rely on tradition alone to guide the future. Past solutions were designed for worlds with fewer variables, slower feedback, and clearer boundaries. The present demands a different posture, one that accepts uncertainty without surrendering direction. Responsibility becomes the willingness to revise assumptions, to slow when momentum threatens coherence, and to resist the temptation to equate capability with entitlement. Power without reflection accelerates collapse. Power with restraint preserves possibility. This responsibility is collective, but unevenly distributed. Some groups wield disproportionate influence over systems that shape everyone's future, while others bear the consequences without meaningful voice. An unfinished species must confront this imbalance honestly. Responsibility is not abstract. It manifests in governance, access, accountability, and inclusion. The future cannot be ethically navigated if those most affected by change are excluded from shaping it. The unfinished nature of humanity also reframes hope. Hope is not optimism that outcomes will be favorable. It is commitment to participation, even when outcomes are uncertain. It is the refusal to treat the future as already decided by inertia or despair. Responsibility and hope converge in the recognition that what is left undone matters as much as what is already built. The future remains open precisely because humanity has not yet settled into a final form. In accepting responsibility as an unfinished species, humanity steps into a quieter maturity, one that does not seek dominance over uncertainty, but engagement with it. The measure of the future will not be the perfection of systems or the elimination of risk, but the capacity to remain attentive, adaptive, and ethically awake as transformation continues. The future will judge humanity not by the scale of its achievements, but by whether it learned, in time, how to live with power without losing its sense of shared obligation to what comes next. At the edge of every long historical transition, certainty disappears first. Humanity stands today without a clear map, facing futures that cannot be calculated with confidence or controlled through force of will. This absence of certainty is often mistaken for weakness, yet it has always been the condition under which genuine choice emerges. When outcomes are guaranteed, decisions become procedural. When the future is open, choice regains its ethical weight. Humanity's task is not to predict what will come, but to decide how it will act while not knowing. Choosing without certainty requires a different relationship to fear. Fear thrives on imagined outcomes and paralyzes action when clarity is absent. Yet the future has never been fully knowable, even in slower eras. What has changed is scale. Decisions now echo farther, persist longer, and shape systems that extend beyond any single lifetime. Choosing without certainty means acting with awareness of consequence rather than confidence in result, accepting that responsibility does not depend on assurance of success. This posture challenges the modern obsession with optimization. Optimization assumes stable goals and predictable feedback. The future humanity faces offers neither. Values must guide action where metrics fail. Restraint must balance capability where incentives push toward excess. Wisdom must operate without guarantees. These qualities cannot be automated or engineered at scale. They emerge from cultural commitment, institutional design, and personal discipline practiced over time. Choosing without certainty also reframes failure. In complex systems, not all efforts will succeed, even when well-intentioned. Failure does not invalidate responsibility. It reveals limits. The danger lies not in imperfect outcomes, but in refusing to choose at all, allowing inertia to decide by default. History is shaped as much by hesitation as by action. The future hardens around what is repeatedly postponed. At this point, humanity's greatest risk is not catastrophe, but abdication. Abdication of agency to acceleration, to systems, to inherited momentum. Choosing without certainty means refusing to let complexity become an excuse for passivity. It means acknowledging that while no single decision will determine everything, cumulative direction still emerges from repeated choices made under pressure. In the end, the future does not require humanity to be wise in advance. It requires humanity to remain willing to learn while acting, to revise while moving, and to care while uncertain. The long view does not promise redemption or ruin. It offers responsibility without reassurance. Whether the future remains livable, meaningful, and shared will depend on humanity's ability to choose again and again, not with confidence in outcome, but with commitment to keeping possibility open in a world that has never offered certainty, only consequence. There are moments in history when the future feels like something to be endured rather than chosen. Uncertainty accumulates, systems strain, and confidence in direction weakens. It becomes tempting to retreat into survival mode, to lower expectations and narrow ambition. Yet it is precisely in such moments that the question of worth emerges most clearly. A future is not valuable because it promises comfort or certainty. It is valuable because it remains open to meaning, capable of being shaped by care rather than surrendered to momentum. A future still worth choosing does not deny risk or complexity. It acknowledges them fully. It recognizes that power has outpaced wisdom, that systems have grown faster than ethics, and that coordination lags behind capability. But it refuses to conclude that these conditions make intention irrelevant. Choice remains possible not because outcomes are predictable, but because direction can still be influenced. Even in uncertainty, values can guide action, shaping tendencies if not guarantees. Choosing such a future requires resisting cynicism disguised as realism. Cynicism claims that forces are too large, systems too entrenched, and incentives too strong to alter course. History repeatedly disproves this claim, not through sudden reversals, but through gradual reorientation driven by persistence rather than certainty. Meaningful change has never emerged from confidence alone. It has emerged from commitment maintained across doubt, sustained long enough to reshape what once seemed inevitable. A future worth choosing also reframes hope. Hope is not expectation of success. It is willingness to act despite incomplete knowledge. It is the refusal to equate uncertainty with futility. In complex systems, hope operates as orientation rather than prediction. It keeps attention directed toward possibility, preserving the capacity to respond creatively rather than defensively as conditions evolve. This orientation demands humility. Humanity must accept that it cannot fully control the future it is shaping. But humility does not imply passivity. It implies stewardship. Acting with awareness of consequence, listening to feedback, and adjusting course without clinging to ego or ideology. A future worth choosing is one where learning remains possible, where mistakes are corrected rather than denied, and where power is tempered by restraint rather than inflated by success. Ultimately, the future's worth does not lie in its promise of progress or permanence. It lies in the continued possibility of shared meaning. As long as humanity can still choose cooperation over fragmentation, care over extraction, and depth over speed, the future remains open, not because it will be easy or safe, but because it has not yet been reduced to inevitability. A future still worth choosing is one that invites responsibility without offering reassurance, asking humanity not for certainty, but for the courage to keep choosing again. To commit without guarantees is to accept a form of responsibility that modern thinking often resists. It means acting without the comfort of certainty, investing effort without assurance of reward, and choosing direction without proof that the path will succeed. In a world conditioned to expect optimization and prediction, such commitment can appear irrational. Yet history shows that the most consequential shifts were rarely guided by guarantees. They emerged from sustained action taken under conditions of doubt, carried forward by people willing to remain engaged even when outcomes were unclear. This kind of commitment reframes what responsibility entails. Responsibility is not the promise of correct outcomes, but the willingness to remain accountable for the process itself. It involves staying present to consequences as they unfold, adjusting course when feedback contradicts intention, and refusing to outsource judgment to inertia or convenience. Commitment, without guarantees, does not eliminate error. It creates the conditions under which error can be recognized and corrected before it hardens into permanence. Such commitment also requires patience, a quality increasingly scarce in accelerated systems. Change guided by guarantees seeks immediate validation. Change guided by commitment accepts delayed impact. The future shaped by patient commitment unfolds slowly, often invisibly, through accumulated decisions that resist spectacle. Its influence is measured not in dramatic reversals, but in trajectories that bend gradually away from harm and toward coherence. This patience is not passive. It is sustained attention applied over time. Committing without guarantees demands collective trust of a particular kind, not trust that others will agree or act identically, but trust that shared effort remains meaningful even amid disagreement. In fragmented societies, this trust is fragile, yet without it, coordination collapses. Commitment becomes isolated, and isolated commitment rarely scales. The future depends on rebuilding enough shared confidence to act together without requiring unanimity or certainty. This posture also reshapes how success is understood. Success ceases to be the achievement of a fixed endpoint and becomes the preservation of possibility. A successful commitment is one that keeps options open, reduces irreversible harm, and strengthens the capacity to respond intelligently to what emerges. In complex systems, maintaining adaptability is often more valuable than reaching a predetermined goal. Commitment serves not to lock the future in place, but to prevent it from closing prematurely. In choosing to commit without guarantees, humanity acknowledges a fundamental truth about its condition. The future has never been a contract with assured returns. It has always been a relationship shaped through participation rather than prediction. What changes now is scale. The consequences of disengagement are larger, and the cost of abdication is higher. Commitment without guarantees is not a leap of faith. It is a disciplined stance toward uncertainty, one that treats the future not as something owed, but as something that must be continuously earned through care, restraint, and the willingness to keep acting even when assurance remains out of reach. As systems accelerate and limits harden, the world can feel as though it is closing in on itself. Options narrow, margins shrink, and decisions acquire a sense of finality they did not once carry. Environmental thresholds, technological lock-in, and social fragmentation combine to create a feeling that the future is being decided faster than it can be questioned. In such conditions, possibility becomes fragile, not because imagination disappears, but because pathways to enact it quietly close. Keeping possibility alive requires recognizing that closure rarely announces itself. Futures are foreclosed incrementally, through defaults accepted, delays normalized, and assumptions left unexamined. Each small concession appears manageable on its own, yet together they accumulate into constraint. Possibility does not vanish through dramatic loss, but through quiet neglect. Preserving it demands attention to these subtle closures, a willingness to notice when convenience begins to replace care and inevitability begins to replace choice. This preservation is not abstract. It takes shape in concrete decisions about infrastructure, governance, education, and culture. It appears in whether systems are designed to adapt or merely to endure, whether institutions invite revision or defend permanence, and whether diversity of perspective is treated as resilience or inefficiency. Possibility survives where flexibility is valued, where learning remains embedded, and where correction is seen not as failure, but as competence. Keeping possibility alive also requires resisting the seduction of false certainty. In closing worlds, certainty becomes attractive because it promises relief from complexity. Simplified narratives, rigid ideologies, and definitive answers offer comfort at the cost of adaptability. Yet, certainty hardens systems, making them brittle under stress. Possibility thrives in environments that tolerate ambiguity, where questions remain open long enough for better answers to emerge through engagement rather than imposition. At the human level, possibility is sustained through attention and care. It lives in the willingness to listen across difference, to invest in futures that may not immediately reward the present, and to maintain inner spaces where reflection can interrupt momentum. When people retain the capacity to imagine lives and societies different from those currently unfolding, closure is delayed. The future remains negotiable rather than imposed. Ultimately, keeping possibility alive is an act of stewardship rather than control. It accepts that no generation can design the perfect future, but every generation can preserve the conditions under which futures remain multiple rather than singular. In a world where forces push toward narrowing outcomes, this stewardship becomes a quiet form of resistance. It holds space for what has not yet been decided, allowing the future to remain not a conclusion, but an ongoing conversation shaped by care, restraint, and the refusal to let complexity collapse into inevitability. The future is rarely decided in a single moment. It is shaped through repetition, through choices made not once, but again and again under changing conditions. Humanity often searches for a decisive turning point, a final answer that will settle direction permanently. Yet history offers a different lesson. What endures is not the choice that felt heroic, but the commitment that was renewed after uncertainty returned. The future remains open not because it is undecided, but because it must be continually chosen. Choosing again requires accepting that clarity will never be complete. Each decision is made with partial knowledge, limited foresight, and imperfect coordination. The temptation is to wait for certainty, to delay action until the picture sharpens. But the picture never fully does. In complex systems, waiting becomes a choice in itself, one that allows momentum to decide by default. Choosing again means acting with care even when confidence is absent, trusting that direction emerges through engagement rather than prediction. This repetition is where responsibility truly lives. Responsibility is not proven by a single correct decision, but by the willingness to remain attentive as consequences unfold. It is the capacity to adjust, to correct, and to recommit without retreating into denial or despair. Choosing again resists the finality of failure and the arrogance of success. It treats both as information rather than verdict, keeping the future responsive rather than fixed. The act of choosing again also protects humanity from resignation. When systems feel overwhelming and trajectories seem locked, resignation appears practical, even realistic. Yet resignation is itself a powerful force, narrowing imagination and accelerating closure. Choosing again interrupts that slide. It asserts that while outcomes cannot be guaranteed, participation still matters. Meaning persists not because the future promises reward, but because engagement affirms care in the present. Over time, these repeated choices accumulate into culture, institutions, and norms that quietly shape what becomes possible. Futures are not built through grand declarations, but through sustained orientation. A society that keeps choosing cooperation over fragmentation, restraint over excess, and depth over speed does not eliminate risk, but it preserves coherence. It keeps open the space where correction remains possible and where meaning can continue to emerge. In the end, the future does not ask humanity to be certain, only to remain willing. Willing to choose again after disappointment, willing to care when outcomes are unclear, willing to act without assurance. This willingness is fragile, yet it is the thread that runs through every livable future humanity has ever created. As long as that thread is not abandoned, the future remains more than a destination. It remains a relationship renewed with each choice, sustained not by confidence in what will come, but by commitment to how humanity continues to show up again and again within the unfolding of time.